Big Descriptions disrupts traditional educational methods. And why do we do that? Because we want to help humans thrive where they are, building better communities. One way that we do that is the Elephant in the Room Unboxed, where we give our audience members the tools and the resources to have those uncomfortable conversations and do it in a humane and anthropological way. We're doing this in partnership with Respect Diversity, another organization that is committed to doing the work with us. Each episode will have a different host and a different guest talking about uncomfortable conversations or uncomfortable topics and giving you the resources of how to navigate them. Let's get uncomfortable.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Elephant in the Room Unboxed. I'm Dr. Noel Jacobs, a clinical psychologist and a health psychologist. This is our podcast where, with terrific guests, we delve into areas of anthropology, cultural understanding, along with our best ways of being together as humans, explained with culture, biology, history, and language. Today, our topic is gender in the human community, and our guest speaker is Dr. Erica Anderson. Welcome, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's an honor to see you and be with you in this podcast after having met you a few years ago at a symposium here in Oklahoma City, specifically related to how we understand and provide positive, research-informed best practice for the gender diverse community. I would really appreciate it if you could begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your professional background.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'm a psychologist going on 45 years now, and clinical psychologist. And I would say, depending upon the point of my career where we're talking, also a health psychologist. I worked in a variety of health settings over the years. I also had a long period, as you know, when I was an executive in the healthcare field. So I understand health systems and payer systems. I've been on both sides of the equation in the USA. And then somewhat preposterously, I've had academic appointments in multiple fields: healthcare management, pediatric psychology, clinical psychology, health psychology, public health, and management. So, I've been involved in that and training of health professionals of many types, but particularly psychologists and mental health people over those years. I also had occasion to kind of monitor, for personal reasons, which we will maybe get into, the status of what was happening with transgender people throughout the world, but particularly in the United States over the last 50 years, and have direct knowledge of some of the things changing, standards of care, changing dynamics, and currently, which brings us to this day, this period, 2023, when there is a lot of controversy in the United States about some of the issues, particularly having to do with transgender youth. Relevant to this discussion, I spent some years at the Child and Adolescent Gender Center at the University of California, San Francisco, one of the preeminent multidisciplinary university-based gender clinics in the world. And so from that perch, had opportunity to do all kinds of interesting things, including some lecturing in South America. And then as you may know from my other activities, I've spent a lot of time in Sweden, one of the countries well known to be progressive insofar as transgender health issues. And I have direct knowledge of a lot of aspects of what's gone on in Sweden over the last 7 or 8 years, having interacted with people in the government and the health authority and members of parliament and consumers and providers in Sweden. So, and I'm going there, by the way. I have a long trip. In a few weeks, I'm going to Europe, and I'm spending about a week in Sweden and then going on to Finland. So that's my shtick over many years.
One of the things that I appreciate most about you has been your willingness to engage in organizations that cross national borders, that really speak to this issue around the world, including your work in Sweden, but the WPATH program, It's important, and I'll have you come back to that in a minute to speak about their role in helping inform best care around the world. You also have a personal story that has brought you both understanding and direct involvement in other ways besides just being a psychologist
Yes.
and an advocate.
Yeah.
If you could tell a little bit of your personal story, we will move into kind of some discussion about what's important for everyone to know.
Okay. So I've been very open about this, very public about this. So I'm very happy to summarize. So I was assigned sex male when I was a baby. I grew up as a boy. Never really had a lot of gender questioning. I was not regarded necessarily as an effeminate boy. In fact, quite the contrary. I was a very typical boy with all kinds of interests that would be gender typical of boys, even rough and tumble, climbed trees and was involved in sports and, and so on. But by the time I was a teenager, I started to wonder what it was like to be we used to think the other gender. They even used to say the opposite gender, which is, we don't use it any longer because it doesn't really help us. But I was a heterosexual male, so I went about my education. I went to university. I started to learn a lot about gender and healthcare for trans people then, and that was almost 50 years ago now. So and the literature at the time, as people know, was pretty horrific in terms of the depiction of gender variant people. My human sexuality textbook in college had some information about gender, but transgender didn't appear in the book nor in the index. Transsexual did, and that few lines about transsexuals appeared in the section on sexual fetishes in the chapter on sexual aberrations. And the phrase that impressed me at the time and has stayed with me really was, there are some, and I'm quoting from the book, there are some who can best be called transsexuals. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born this way. Some of them can be helped with access to medicines and surgery to live in the opposite gender. They suffer from a deep-seated psychiatric disorder. Well, then I went on to graduate school in psychology, so you can imagine how horrifying it would be, the idea that I was one of these people who was suffering from a deep-seated psychiatric disorder. So I, like many people did in that time, I sort of compartmentalized what was going on with me. I finished graduate school, got married. We moved to another state. I had children. I'm the biological father of 2 adult children whom I helped raise with their mother. It took well into adulthood before I started to specifically try to come to terms with who I was. And as you hear, the context was challenging at best. And 20, 25 years ago, the number of professionals who were prepared to help people like me was limited. I went to see some of them. I had a number of very unsatisfactory encounters, even people who were highly qualified physicians and psychologists. So I kind of backed away and put everything back in the box, elephant in the box, I guess, yeah. And didn't let the elephant out for a while. And eventually I realized I had to deal with it. I sought appropriate help. By then I did find myself with a clinical psychologist who was quite expert at these issues, and physicians who were quite expert at these issues. I was at the time living in the Philadelphia area, and I was very lucky. I did my research. I tried to figure out if I was going to do this, who was I going to have help me, and I did determine those things, and then along the way did decide I was going to transition. I did that. That's about 12 years ago now. So I lived most of my life as a man, and I had a successful career, but I was in living in fear that everything would come crashing down if I transitioned. And I'm fortunate it didn't. I moved on. I relocated to California, which I thought would be a more hospitable state for me. I think that was correct. And I've pursued my work. And then, well, since transitioning in the last 10 years, I've had many opportunities to work to try to advocate for the well-being of gender variant people and to help them directly, both in my clinical work at UCSF and in my private practice. I left UCSF a year and something ago. I resigned my leadership positions from WPATH because I felt I wanted to be unencumbered by organizational dynamics, which are clearly challenging for many people for many reasons. But in my case, I felt that the institutions weren't taking into account all the important factors going on, and it was slowing down what I felt was needed to happen. And so I've been happily, frankly, a free agent. And this is the period that you're referring to where I've been interviewed a lot. I've been writing a lot. I'm currently working on 2 books. Hopefully they'll get written. One is pretty well along, but I have ambitions to share a lot of what I've learned and my observations about things. People have seen these as reported various media, but I feel like I want to tell my story the way it needs to be told. I also want to offer, in the other book with a co-author, I want to offer a critique of the kind of strange dynamics we find ourselves in the United States about many subjects, but particularly about transgender health subjects. And we thought about this book before we got to the point we're at now, where in many states, including yours, state legislatures are taking it upon themselves to practice healthcare and make decisions for patients, irrespective of what they want or their doctors want. And I'm trying to fight the good fight to resist that. It's pretty difficult. Pretty difficult.
I appreciate your willingness to get in and try to be a part of that advocacy, especially in parts of the country that have drifted in this direction because we had years of affirming healthcare in Oklahoma that is currently under attack.
Exactly.
So coming back just a bit, because of your personal and your training specific and practice knowledge of the spectrum of gender and diversity across humanity, would you take a second and please define gender terms for us, and then gender and gender expression from the understanding of our interacting biological, psychological, and social components?
Yeah, happy to do it. When I used to teach a human sexuality course for future psychologists, I used to say we've got gender identity, and gender expression, and we've got sexuality, sexual orientation, and we've got superficial gender expression, which some people think of as being masculine or feminine, gender conforming to the sex you were assigned at birth. I also introduce sex, which I differentiate from gender. They're not completely unrelated, but sex is what we're born into, and our current language is generally we say you were assigned a sex at birth. That was what was put on your birth certificate. And most people grow up and they're very comfortable with a gender that aligns with that, male gender, female gender, and don't have any issues. But there are some subset of people, and this is, as you imply, Noel, this has always been the case in human civilization, of people whose felt gender, whose interior thinking about themselves doesn't conform with a stereotypical male or female gender that would align with their sex at birth. And so those of us, and I'll put myself in that category, who eventually learn these things, figure out these things conclude these things about themselves, we would say would have a gender identity that's different than the sex assigned at birth. A different gender identity might be one of the two binary genders, and they used to say opposite. If you're born male and you have a female gender identity, that's the opposite. That's not helpful, but different. And so these days, the three most common categories are transgender male, who would be someone who is assigned sex female at birth and comes to learn about themselves as a male gender, and transgender female, who would be someone like me, who was assigned male at birth, but concludes over time that their felt gender is female and non-binary. And in the non-binary area, arguably, it's kind of exploding as far as, how do we describe that? And, many people who use that label say that they're neither male nor female. And of course, that makes the head explode of some people who can't possibly imagine what would that be. And the problem is a lot of these determinations are very personal. We struggle sometimes to communicate in language, and that can be a barrier. So, in my work, I'm often asking people to tell me what words they use to describe themselves. And then if I'm not very clear, I say, please explain to me what you mean by that word. And that would include even a word thrown around all the time, queer. What does queer mean? Well, to some people, it's being gay or lesbian. To some people, it means gender nonconforming. To some people, it means all of that. And so I want people to help me understand what's going on with them. The gender expression I want to emphasize is something we also are dealing with. And regrettably, society still is somewhat dictatorial about what the expectations are of someone with a certain gender. So if you don't conform to that, then you're kind of seen as an outlier, maybe even at its extreme a freak, and so there's not that much toleration. I'm worried that even in a time that we've known each other, that there's been an exertion of more strenuous gender role policing than there was before. It wasn't that long ago when we had, ways that kids could express themselves in terms of outward appearance, and it wasn't necessarily tied to gender. Like, I don't think people would say goth is necessarily related to a gender, or hippie, or, a lot of terms, bohemian, beatnik, going way back before anybody listening to this has been alive. But so we've had terms, even tomboy. I mean, we had the term when I was growing up, tomboy. One of my two biological sisters was considered a tomboy. She grew up to be a very typical, even attractive heterosexual female. She was surprised at puberty when she was told by adults, "Oh, you can't play with the boys anymore." It's like, why? Of course, there was a sexual overtone to that, which people understand, but she didn't really understand it. But now we understand it, and some people are worried that in our zeal to support gender nonconforming people, we're maybe creating some false positives, that some people are considering themselves trans who are just nonconforming. Some people maybe even are proto-gay or lesbian, and they're told, oh, if you're uncomfortable with your body or how other people see you, then maybe you're in the wrong body, and so you're really trans. So I've been using a phrase which is a little bit inflammatory, but here goes, that some of the people enforcing, supporting gender variant kids are transing away the gay. A lot of my gay and lesbian friends believe that is really happening. And I have to say, I think there's a reason for it. I think there's less tolerance, if it's possible, than there was a generation or ago about conformity prior to puberty, certainly at puberty. And so I was asked by somebody recently, I said, if you could change one thing about society in terms of this, what would you change? I'd say I'd really crank up the acceptance of individual differences.
Across the spectrum.
Exactly.
Let people develop and be who they are without putting expectations from any direction on them.
Less judgment, more acceptance.
Many people, you touched on this just a minute ago, believe that transgender human experience is a recent phenomenon. But both written history and cultural anthropology tell a much longer story of this. Talk about some of the important aspects of history and culture that already informed our understanding before this current moment.
Yeah. Well, as you know, you've invoked it. There are long traditions in some cultures of gender nonconforming people, or even some say a third gender. In many indigenous peoples, there's something called two-spirit. It's probably something that is present in Oklahoma, that with a strong history of Native Americans who've lived there. And so there is that. I've been to some two-spirit powwows. They're a gas. They're just a gas. It's a celebration. It's like people of all ages, all genders, all sexualities get together, and they, and I honestly don't understand the native tongue that is spoken, but I understand the spirit of what's going on, which is warm and accepting and celebratory. There's communities in South Asia, Haraji in India, which has, we think, probably for millennia, had a group of people who are gender nonconforming, predominantly assigned sex male people who are seen as a baby boy, but feel themselves to be female, and they're raised as females, and they have actually community tasks. They're the ones who go to celebrate when a baby's born, for example. I'm told. I haven't seen that. I want to see that. There's also in Brazil a long tradition of people called transvesti, which is pretty similar to a word we use. And I've been to some of their gatherings, and it's like wonderful. They're embraced by other women. They are predominantly transgender women, and they also live fully as female. Before the advent of modern medicine and certainly surgery, these folks lived and were accepted, and there was no discrimination against them, or certainly not violence against them. There is now. Brazil is unfortunately one of the most violent societies to live in if you're a transgender person. And I've had the sobering experience of reading names of transgender women murdered in Brazil at Transgender Day of Remembrance. And one year in the Bay Area, I was intending to read 80 names. 1 year. That's just the people who were known, and I couldn't make it. They provided the names, the dates of death, and the means of death, and some of them were so violent and horrific that it made me cry. It made me cry, and I finally had to step down, and one of my friends stepped up and kept reading the names. So those are 3 areas. Raji, transvesti, two-spirit. So, and there are others.
I can't imagine having to be emotionally and physically present and walk through a community's suffering after knowing what's happened to those individuals, specifically because they were living the life that was true to who they were.
Yeah.
That brings us back to an understanding of the human community. And you had mentioned a minute ago that we have had, and especially recently are seeing, this increased pressure to conformity on one hand related to being binary, either assigned sex at birth male, and that has to be who you are, or assigned sex at birth female, and that has to be who you are. And then these other pressures that may even come from within the gender diverse community at times for how people are supposed to identify and live. That can be in both cases different from who they would fully understand themselves to be. And because we're talking about anthropology and human society in this podcast, I would really like to hear you more fully explain what is the best way for our society to support all individuals in their development, in their growing understanding of who they are and how they should be in terms of living authentically and received with love in the community around them.
Well, I know you are welcoming and accepting of difference, and and we share that, and I try to teach that. I say things like everyone should feel loved and accepted, and that the pressure is to conform, and it can come from many sources, to conform to some believed proper way to behave. Uh, that is unrelenting, really. Um, there are some societies where they have embarked upon efforts to be more gender neutral or gender accepting and not have such stark differences between the binary genders of male and female. Sweden is one such country, for example, which has, as a matter of public policy, tried to not discriminate, and as is true in many societies, the females were discriminated against by the males. So by public policy, of course, retirement is equal, pay is equal, parental leave is afforded to all parents, whether they're male or female, straight or gay, and people take it because of the value placed upon nurturing a child and upon attachment. They're well informed about how important those things are for both the child and the parent. In America, we have been far too stereotyped with the responsibility being borne by mothers and females, and and actually kind of leaving dads out in some cases, which is really unfortunate. Having been a dad, I mean, I was there when my children were born. Literally, the moment I could have caught them coming out of their mother's uterus. I was over the shoulder of the OBGYN who did catch them. So, and we know that the first 3 years of life are really, really important. So what children are taught in those first 3 years will form a lot of what happens later. So if we're teaching children that mothers and fathers are both important for you, or all parents are important to you, and and everyone mixes and matches roles, and no one has a higher status than another. That's a basic start, and we're so far from that in the United States. I can't even see across the ocean. And then I would say, to beat a pulpit a little bit, I think we're still in America in the Victorian era. If you listen to some of these legislators talk, you think, well, are you in the 21st century yet? Where did you grow up? It's like some of the most ignorant things I've ever heard have been promulgated by people in legislatures who just are so ill-informed. And I've heard tell that some of the legislatures have even rebuffed efforts by people like me to go and talk to them and educate them. Like, really, you're not interested in education. Ouch. Not interested in society improving or society evolving. Like, so I think we have many factors in the United States that hold us back. I'm all about, as you know, civil discourse. I talk to people I disagree with all the time. I've been on some media that would generally be considered right wing. Okay, I've had conversations with people who are very conservative, but they're willing to talk to me. They're willing to listen to me, and so I feel like it's in a way my obligation to engage them and not to rebuff them and say, "Oh no, you believe incorrectly, therefore I won't talk with you." I don't know how we got here. I remember protesting the Vietnam War as a teenager and young adult, and I remember having conversations with people in the next generation, talking to them about why I believed as I did. Which I will say, a little bit of hubris here. I think I was right. Vietnam War was a mistake, and it was a foolhardy exercise. I have similar feelings about Iraq, the wars in the Middle East. But but I'll talk to people. I'll listen to people, and so I'm worried that there's a sentiment among some people in society that they don't have to listen to people who have a different point of view. Oh, that's dangerous. That's really dangerous.
That very thing has happened right here in our own state, where late last year, early this year, lawmakers looked at money that was earmarked for funding of healthcare services in Oklahoma. And at the last minute, an additional piece of legislation was introduced that said the largest healthcare system in Oklahoma would lose access to all of the additional funding that included tens of millions of dollars for new behavioral health facilities for youth, unless they quit providing all gender affirming care to youth. So it immediately froze and shut down that affirming, supportive healthcare for at least a few hundred youth in Oklahoma. And at the hearing, this question was brought up: why have you not met with medical providers and advocates and psychologists that have a different understanding than the direction that you're headed? And the response that was clear by the legislators that answered the question was, we don't believe their science. We do not need their voice because they're incorrect in these areas. And it speaks directly to that concern that you brought up, that we're at this place where we won't listen to or learn from people who are different from us.
Yes.
And from a psychological perspective, from a human factors perspective, from a cultural anthropology perspective, seems to be a dangerous place, regardless of what is decided.
Yes.
When we're not willing to listen to each other.
Absolutely. It's tribal in the worst sense of that. It's like, my tribe is right, your tribe is wrong. I'm not going to listen to anything you say. I have no sympathy for you or your problems. I only am going to take care of my tribe. And I don't know how a politician elected to public office can operate that way. Like, they're representing a constituency. Are they sure that there's nobody in their district or area that would be adversely affected by what they do and how they think? That's pretty outlandish. It takes a lot of hubris to think that you're right. It's the same hubris that caused the Crusades, in the Middle Ages, thinking that the Holy Land belonged to Christians, not just everybody and it fuels tribal conflicts everywhere. There's one going on in Sudan now. I understand there's violence breaking out in the Middle East between Sunni and Shia. It's like, have we not done this already and realized this is not helpful going forward?
Through your training and expertise, you also have an important voice in this idea of coming back from
Yeah,
conflict and disengagement and dehumanization of the other.
yeah,
And as a member of a group that has been dehumanized, especially in the last several years, and working to try to keep that conversation going, keep dialogue, keep relationship forming, what do you see as the most important ways that and the gender of the human doesn't matter, cisgender, gender diverse,
hmm
ways that we can protect and advocate for each other across our differences, including gender?
yeah. Well, I also say often, I want more light and less heat. Let's turn down the temperature on the discourse and and tune up our acuity to actually hear what the other person has to say and what information that they're bringing to us. If I may harken back to something you invoked a few minutes ago, Noel, the legislator who says, I don't believe your science." Uh, last I looked, there's only one science. There's science, and then there's non-science, and we have so conflated the words believe and know in American society. I mean, for years, and of course, you're part of the petrol fuel homeland, kind of. Um, the idea that you could deny climate science is anathema to me. It's like, well, it's the science. There may be some open questions still, but if we're committed to learning the truth, then that's what we accept. And it might evolve, okay, with more investigation, more information. Okay, so I will be glad to change my view based on objective information that better informs me. I don't want to believe some science and not believe other science. It's not rational.
And it violates the method of
Exactly.
science, right?
Exactly.
It's not that science doesn't move forward and learn new things. Some of those things might contradict old information,
hmm
but because of method and because of a lack of conflicting data, when we reach certain conclusions, we rest on that as truth for now,
Right.
unless new science that moves further shows us something different than what we've already understood.
Right. And a good example of this in the area we're talking about today is the evolution and the understanding of trans identity. Whereas it was considered a deep-seated psychiatric disorder 50 years ago, now no less than the WHO and the International Classification of Diseases has changed the terminology from gender dysphoria, the last DSM-5 currently in use in the USA, to gender incongruence. And ICD-10, the revision, substituted gender incongruence. But now in ICD-11, we've taken it out of psychiatry and put it in sexual health, so that it's a difference. It's something we take note of. It's important, but it's not necessarily a psychiatric condition. Most people don't know that. What I just summarized. You know it, but most people don't know it. But if we actually operate on that changed understanding, and we don't pathologize people who are gender variant, it will lead to a different way of approaching this. Some of the people who are opposing this care believe that trans people don't exist; it's just a fiction, or that maybe they exist but they're crazy, or maybe they're crazy but they should get mental health care, but not anything to do with gender. But all of these are mistakes. They're based on false assumptions, and so we have to talk it through. I'm about to go to Europe. I'm going to meet with some people. I'm having a vacation, by the way, serious vacation. Yeah, but I'm also going to Sweden, where I've been many times, and talk to some people there who have been thinking about these issues and looking at them very rigorously in the last couple of years, and then going to a meeting in Finland with a select group of people who were invited to come and talk about these very issues, with the implication that what we want to point to is a direction. Where do we go from here? Where do we evolve? I'll let it drop also that I'm in conversation with Hilary Cass, the pediatrician in the UK who has chaired the Cass Commission about gender youth issues. And those of us who sit down and talk about the challenges have a lot in common. Okay, we have compassion for the people affected by any of these issues. We have a recognition that these people aren't going to go away. Gender variant people are not going to disappear unless in some horrific future apocalypse we're rounded up and put in camps or worse. So trans people are going to be around. So it's not an option to ignore all of this and pretend like it doesn't happen. And I would argue that there's something vital and kind of wonderful about gender variance, and that some of us who've had these unusual experiences have something to contribute. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with cisgender men about the issue, with cisgender women, both gay and straight, about the issue. And, like this ringing, I don't want him to come after me and ask me, but Matt Walsh asking, what is a woman? Like having a conversation, what does it mean to be a woman? And is it contextual? Is it a woman in a certain society at a certain period of time? Is it individual? Are there some very individual things? I mean, I don't think you know this, maybe, Noel, but I've been a consultant to the Illinois Department of Corrections for the last 4 years, helping them transform a bigendered, repressive prison system to one that is accepting of trans identity and supportive of gender affirming care, including hormones and surgeries. Now, if we can change prisons, I mean, arguably they're some of the toughest institutions around. I think there's hope for us that we can change a lot of institutions to make our society better.
I was going to actually speak to this idea that in spite of the adversity, the persecution, the political rhetoric and lawmaking and policymaking that is negatively affecting the gender diverse community, you still, just like when I met you in Oklahoma a few years ago, seem optimistic. You know there's work to do. You know that there are terrible things happening, but there's incredible potential, and there are signs that we should be hopeful about that we can promote.
Mm-hmm.
I am so thankful that you are deeply engaged in this human, cultural, personal work. What are some final thoughts that you want to leave us with as we wrap up?
Well, I love that you I said it earlier, but I'm going to repeat it. I think you get me, that although I am a critic at times, I'm a self-styled naysayer here and there. I want to build bridges, not walls. I want to have reconciliation, not division and alienation. I guess it's comes from somewhere inside of me that I'm, kind of a dispositional optimist, and that I think that, I've seen the progress in understanding of trans identities in my lifetime. I've been the recipient of some wonderful help for me to be me. I've, at great cost to myself, I've made some decisions to do things. And, knock on wood. There's no wood right here, by the way. Oh, no, my desk is wood, I guess. It's paid off for me. Okay. Not everything has worked out. Not everything is rosy. But I never expected that. I was a mature person by the time I really decided to act on my sincere, authentic self. So I do remain hopeful. I am a spiritual person. I think that there is reason to believe that there's something more than tangible, objects. I think there's something more than just energy. Some essentialists would say, everything is energy. Some physicists talk like that, and like I kind of get that, but it's like, well, there's something we can't explain yet, if ever. And I want to take the view that there's some things more important than who thinks what thoughts. There's and the things that we hold most dear, it's difficult to quantify. Love and beauty, sincerity, honesty. These are things we could talk about, but in the end, we have to live them as much as think about them.
I so appreciate your voice and your work and your humanity that brings everybody else in to your space as fully human.
Mm.
And I wish you the very best of outcomes in your work. I'm excited that you get to have a vacation in addition to doing some work over there, because I know you tend to just go and do and not take care of yourself in the process. So very glad that you're getting that vacation. I hope that we can speak again soon. And thank you so much for being a guest on our program today. We appreciate the work that you do, and we appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me. I wish everyone there in Oklahoma all the best. And if I can ever be of assistance, let me know.
We will definitely be asking you back.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Thick Descriptions, Elephant in the Room Unboxed. Want to learn more about us, what we're doing to disrupt traditional educational methods? Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, thickdescriptions.org, 405-397-0584.